Gaming Geek here with a tutorial video on how to play Mythos by Warcradle. Before we get into today's video, just want to share with you about the GGGG. Each month, Bob the Beholder picks one of my Patreon supporters to receive the gratitude gift for the month. Here's a list of all of my awesome Patreon supporters. And for last month, March of 2021, Jared Sneed was chosen by Bob to receive the Wonderworld's Drenheim Prison Tower. So thanks to everyone who continues to support this channel. You guys make it what it is. All last month I was talking about how the gratitude gift was supposed to be the Street Fighter board game, but that got delayed, and so now it's being pushed over into this month, April of 2021. If you want to get in on that, go ahead and click on my Patreon link below and sign up. Warcradle makes Wild West Exodus, which is a steampunk western theme game. And as interesting as that looks, I read through the rules and it's a little bit more complex than I wanted it to be. So instead, I looked into their game called Mythos, and it does have a simpler rule set and not nearly as many miniatures. And so I think at this point, the game is more streamlined and more for me. I also think the theme is interesting. I don't really have any Cthulhu type games, but this is my first foray into that genre, even though I'm really familiar with the tropes behind Cthulhu games. This one seems interesting to me. I especially like how madness is one of the key characteristics of this game and how it affects your characters. So that fits into the overall theme really well. There are some gameplay videos, but I haven't seen anyone giving a tutorial on the rules, and so that's why I'm coming out with this video. You can check it out and see whether or not this is a rule set that you like and whether or not this is a game for you. But I like it because it is small warbands of about 5 each. And that low model count makes it manageable for me and not so many people to be needing to paint up. So here you see 2 factions, the Wildborn as well as the Hidden Ones. To be honest, really the reason why I got into this game was because I saw this awesome crab miniature. And so that piqued my interest, and that's why I got into Mythos, was because of this character right here. But they have a number of other factions with really cool miniatures, and if you want to look at their line and pick your favorites, these are my 2 favorites. I love these snakes, part of the Wildborn faction, and this goat demon guy right here is awesome as well. So overall, really impressed by the high quality resin casts of these miniatures with a lot of detail. And I was able to paint them up really quickly using my speed painting method with contrast colors. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the rules. All right, so what do you need to play Mythos? First thing you want to do is go to Warcradle's website and download a couple of things. Obviously, the rule book. But also you want to download the token sheet. I went ahead and went on Thingiverse and found these made by Taronin. These 3D printed tokens, and if you have a 3D printer you can go ahead and do what I did, which was multi-layer printing so that I can switch out the color and have different color tokens. If you don't have that, go ahead and print that out onto cardstock. Also, you want the blast template, and I created this file. Go to Thingiverse if you want to print out one of these as well. Otherwise, use a cardboard printout. You also want to print out the stat cards for the faction that you want. Each faction has about 5 characters, and they're going to add up to about 100 points. So check out the ones that you like. You can purchase the models here in the United States. I can only find them on eBay. Each faction starter set is about $40, $45, so you can opt to do that. Also, if you don't want to print out and you want physical copies, of the tokens and the rule book. You can buy that for about $25 US. Also, you want to download this rule summary that I created because it's just going to make referencing super easy. Just note wherever you see a parentheses, that is the page number in the rule book that you're going to find that rule. You're going to also want some terrain. Here I'm featuring the printable scenery terrain that I talked about last week. If you want to see that video, go ahead and click here. But you want to have a 3-foot by 3-foot gaming board, and about 30% of that board should be covered with some kind of terrain. You're also going to want to have some kind of ruler. Again, you can download this if you want. Just print it on cardstock, fold it over, and tape the edges. Or you can just use a tape measure, whatever you want to do. And just some dice, some D6s. I think 4 is enough for each side. Most of the time you're just rolling 2 dice for attacks and tests and things like that. Sometimes 3 when you charge. Some random things to note. If you roll 2 6s, that is a critical success. And regardless of what you need to roll, this is always considered 1 point above what you need to succeed. Also, if you roll a critical success while attacking, it triggers the Mythos effect automatically. You don't have to spend a Mythos in order to have that effect triggered. Conversely, if you roll Snake Eyes, that is a critical failure, and this always counts as a 0. The test that you roll for in Mythos, you want to try to hit 13, rolling a 2d6 most of the time. Now, you might say, oh, look at that, I got a critical success. How do I even hit 13? Even with the max? It's because most of the rolls does have an additional modifier. So for example, if that was a sanity test, I would add 6 to that with a total of 18. So most of these abilities is granting you an addition to whatever you're rolling. There are some abilities that allow you to re-roll dice, but you can only re-roll dice once. If you choose to re-roll, you have to re-roll your entire pool and accept the second roll, which here, that was terrible, but I would have to accept that. Let's go ahead and take a look at this card. Here we have the faction up here, the name, you have the traits. Each faction, you must field a leader, and only one leader. MV is movement in inches, that's how many inches she can move with a move action. Her charge is 7. That's how many inches she can move up to in order to charge someone. Combat defense, she adds 7 to her roll when defending against melee attacks. Range defense is what she adds to her roll when defending against ranged attacks. Arcane defense is what she adds when rolling against arcane attacks. Again, this is her sanity. This is her mythos, the number of myth that she collects at the beginning of each turn. This is the number of wounds. Once you hit 0, the figure is dead and removed from play. Here, let me show you on Lauren. She has a 3. That is her madness threshold. Once she has 3 madness, she flips the card over, gets rid of any of the madness tokens that she has, and her traits actually change a little bit, oftentimes for the worse. Here in the red, this shows you what kind of attacks that she has. So here her chain blade is a combat, which is melee, has to be melee, so base to base, and it has a mythos ability of bleed. She also adds 8 to her roll when attacking. On the hunt just enables her to be able to spend a myth to reroll, and then this is a bunch of her other abilities. Again, that might change whenever you flip it over to this side. You can pre-measure in this game, so you can check to see whether or not you're close enough to charge, or whether or not you have range when you're making a ranged attack, so that's not an issue. For line of sight purposes, each model is the diameter of their base and just goes up to the highest point on the model, excluding limbs. So for her, imagine her as a cone that comes up to here. As long as one section of that cone can see another section of another enemy model, then they have line of sight, and it only has to be part of it. Defender might get some bonuses for defense if they are undercover, and I will address that later. So you can pick one of the scenarios from the back of the rulebook. Each player rolls a 2d6, and whoever has the highest will go first, or choose who goes first. And so here the hidden ones won the roll. So they might choose to punt it over and say, you guys need to field your characters first on the board, and then the second player will go. And then we have the turn sequence, which is in 3 phases: the start phase, activation phase, and the end phase. The start phase begins with each side again rolling to see who has initiative, and it is a tie, so you're going to re-roll. And this time it is the Wildborn that won the initiative. And again, they can choose to punt it over and say, you pick a character to go first. So if they punt it over, then the hidden ones would have to choose one of their characters to go first. They would do all of their actions. Then the other side would go next with one of their characters. So it's back and forth. Also during the start phase, you do madness rolls. So in initiative order again, players roll on the madness table for any of their characters that have reached or surpassed their madness threshold, which again would have them flipped over onto their other side. And I'll show that to you later. And then finally, to end the start phase, everyone generates Mythos. They add up all of these of the remaining characters in their faction, and that's how many Mythos that they receive. And usually I keep track of my Mythos with this wound tracker and reduce it as I'm spending it. Or if you don't have something like this, you can use a die or just write it down on a piece of paper. It's also helpful to have some beads or some kind of indicator to set next to one of your characters when it's already activated, since it's going back and forth. So during the activation phase, you have a number of different actions that you can take, and most of your characters will have 2 AP to spend. And let me explain the movement activation. We're going to take a look at Mercy Good and see that her movement is 5. So if I use the movement activation, I can move her 5 inches, which would be to over here. Or her charge is up to 7 inches, which would have been 2 more inches, but that's not close enough to go base to base with any of the enemies. There are some modifiers, so difficult ground is half movement. And obstacles that are taller than an inch in height reduce the movement by height. So for example, this fence or these bushes are less than an inch tall, so they don't really hinder, or you don't need to add any inches to their movement to go over them. They can just step over it readily enough. But if it is an inch or taller, you just add that amount to their overall movement for that turn. Climbing costs the same amount. So for example, if Mercy was climbing up this ladder, we would just add 3 inches to her overall movement. Then she could move her final 2 inches and finish. You cannot end overlapping the base of another, and you have to be able to end up completely separated. There are some circumstances where there might be some overlap, and if that's the case, you are allowed to shift and move the fewest number of models possible in order to accommodate everyone. In order to jump across gaps like this, I need to make a combat test. And for Mercy, her combat is 8. So I go ahead and roll. And I have an 8 here. So with the 8, that's 16. She does succeed. So she is able to jump across this 4-inch gap, and then she can move 1 more inch to complete her movement. Now, if she had failed, she would fall down, and she falls down as close to the point of where she jumped originally. So she would end up there, and she's going to take 1 wound for every inch she falls above her height. So there is 1 inch above her height from the distance that she fell, so she's going to take 1 wound. Now she could have voluntarily chosen to jump down, and if she does so, she again makes the combat test, but with a -1 for every inch above your model's height. So instead of her combat bonus giving her an 8, that would be reduced to 7. So I roll, oh, she rolled only a 3. So with 7, that makes it a 10. That is a failure. Now, if she would have succeeded, she can just continue moving with just a -1 from the total movement. So her total movement would have been reduced to 4 had she succeeded. But because she failed, again, she's going to take a wound for falling down 1 inch above her own height, and again is unable to move from where she landed. Now she can use her second action point in order to do another move action, and she might choose to do that in order to move 5 over here. Now let's say Mercy wanted to move, but she was engaged with the Dunsmith Witch. So she declares that she's going to be moving away, and that's going to provide an opportunity attack, and in Mythos it's called a disengage strike. So the Dunsmith Witch is going to go ahead and get a free attack off of her while she's disengaging. So she's going to roll and basically has 3 options: the knife, the dust, or the grasp of the deep. This is combat, range, and arcane. She will get a penalty for using the ranged attack and arcane attack while engaged with her target. So she's just going to go ahead and use her knife and get the +7 to her combat roll. So let's go ahead and roll hers. She rolled a 7 plus the 7 for her combat knife over here. That makes her roll a 14. And then for Mercy, she's going to take a look at her combat defense value, which is 7. Oh, she rolled Snake Eyes, which is a total failure. Counts as 0, but she is able to add that 7 to it. So the difference is 14 minus 7 is Mercy's going to take 7 points of damage, which is going to take her down to 9 wounds. Not only does she lose her movement, but she loses that 1 action point to do the move action. Now, if she was in contact with both Mr. Krabby and the Witch, she would have to succeed in a combat action between both of them. So she would first roll for the Dunsmith Witch and then with Mr. Krabs. And if she fails with either one of them or both of them, she loses her movement AP and must stay there along with taking any wounds. Another activation that she can use is to spend 2 AP in order to charge. And for Mercy, her charge value is 7, which is plenty of distance to go ahead, and so she's going to declare a charge against the Dunsmith Witch. Even if she comes within base-to-base contact with more than one model, she has to make her attack with the Dunsmith Witch. But she's going to go ahead and just come in base-to-base here, because she's going to have penalties if she's touching more than one enemy. And when you spend that 2 AP and you have a successful charge, you get a combat attack for free. Not only are you able to make a combat attack, but you get a bonus D6 for charging. So let's go ahead and roll here. So the Dunsmith Witch rolled a 7 and would add her combat defense, which is an 8 for a total of 15. And then Mercy rolled a 9 and then adds her hunting knife 8 to that, which is 17. So that's a difference of 2. So the Dunsmith Witch would take 2 points of damage. If Mercy wanted, she could spend one of her Mythos in order to have the bleed effect onto the Dunsmith Witch, which she will do. So she's going to add a bleed token over here. If you're engaged with an enemy like this, you are not allowed to charge another enemy. You must be disengaged at the beginning in order to be able to charge. You are allowed to jump down in the midst of a charge. So let's say this guy wanted to charge Mercy Good. He would just take a combat check to jump down to here. And as long as he succeeds, he can continue the charge. If he fails, he has to stop there and the charge doesn't go off. In order to charge, you also have to have line of sight at the beginning of the charge to the target. So let's go ahead and go through some of the fighting actions. So first of all, let's do the combat attack, which costs 1 action point. And you make a combat attack against an enemy model while you're engaged. So you have to be base to base. So it would be advantageous if you are some space away to spend the 2 AP to do a charge, since you're going to gain that bonus die when you are rolling. So it's always advantageous to do that. But let's say you start your turn already engaged base to base, or you move in. It is an option just to spend 1 AP to do a basic move. You can engage without charging, and then spend another AP to attack. All you're doing is just rolling your die and adding combat. So let's look at Mercy Good. She has her combat is an 8. So she's going to roll her die, and basically she got an 8. She adds the 8 to it, and her total value is 16. The Dunsmith Witch rolls her die, and she received a 8 as well. And let's look at her combat defense value, which is 8. So it is actually tied at 16 each. So ties go to the defender. So in this case, the Dunsmith Witch is successful in ferrying off the attack from Mercy. And because there was no difference in the die values rolled, no damage is taken. But let's say she rolled actually 2 more, then Mercy would have won the combat with 2 points extra, and that's how much damage the Dunsmith Witch would get. Also, Mercy, as the attacker, has the choice of spending 1 myth in order to add the bleed, which is her Mythos effect. But whenever the defender wins, they are not allowed to do that. Now Mercy still has 1 action point after making that combat attack. She can choose to spend her second to do another combat attack. So in Mythos, you are able to repeat any of the steps. You just have to complete 1 action before you go to the next one. Now let's say it is the Dunsmith Witch's turn, and she is going to use her first action point to make a ranged attack. Now she could do a combat attack here, but she wants to potentially use this Mythos effect to blind her enemy. So she's choosing to do Lime Dust instead of her combat, even though she's engaged. So you are allowed to use both a range or arcane attack, which is normally a ranged attack, but sometimes it's advantageous to use it even when you are in melee. And if you are engaged like this, both your range and arcane attacks has to target whoever is engaged with you. For example, here the Dunsmith Witch couldn't, while engaged with Mercy, choose to attack the snake over here. Now she is going to get a penalty, so whenever you do a ranged attack or a arcane attack against someone who is engaged with you, you're going to get a -1 for every enemy that is engaged with you. But she's going to go ahead and risk it, so she's going to roll her die. She gets a 7 and adds the 8, but it's a -1, so her total is 14. Mercy is going to get her defense roll, which she also gets an 8 plus 7, which is her range defense here, is 15. So she actually wins by 1. So at this point, with any ranged or arcane attacks, if you're the defender and you win the roll, you have a choice to make here. First choice is you can choose to disengage and move away or move in any direction 2 inches. You just have to end up not engaged with any other enemy. So she can move 2 inches in any direction as long as she's not engaged when she ends. And there is no opportunity attacks from any enemies. So the Dunsmith Witch isn't going to get a disengage strike when this happens. So this is an opportunity for Mercy just to get away a little bit. The second choice that the defender has is she can remain engaged and just choose to inflict the damage, and that's the difference between the 2 rolls. So in this case, she would stay engaged and do 1 point of damage to the Dunsmith Witch. If you choose to disengage, you won't do that damage, but maybe it's advantageous for you to inflict that damage rather than disengaging, and so those are the 2 options you have if you are attacked either with a ranged attack or with an arcane attack while engaged. Now when you're not engaged and you get hit by either of those 2 attacks, you do not have the option of inflicting damage to the attacker. You can only move 2 inches if you win the defense roll. An arcane attack works pretty similar to the ranged attack. You're just using these stats instead. And had the Dunsmith Witch won the roll, she would inflict the amount of damage, which is the difference between the 2 dice, and she has the option of spending a Mythos in order to have the Mythos effect for whichever attack that she is using. Let's say that Mercy is engaged with Mr. Krabs. Normally, the Dunsmith Witch would not be able to make a ranged or arcane attack onto an enemy that is engaged with someone else. But with both of these, she has an option called either an aim shot or a focus cast. And that costs 2 AP, and it enables an unengaged character to be able to target an enemy that is engaged with someone else. Still has to have range and line of sight, but as long as that is true, the aim shot basically allows to make a ranged attack against her, and then the focus cast enables her to make an arcane attack. Now, the big thing about this is it costs all 2 AP in order to make those attacks. And let's say in this circumstance, the Dunsmith Witch is trying to shoot Mercy. She is going to get a cover bonus because the Mr. Krabs is in the way and is providing some kind of cover. So the modifier is for both, only for ranged attacks and arcane attacks, because obviously if they were in hand-to-hand combat, cover wouldn't matter. But in this circumstance, Mercy would get a +2 to her range or arcane defense because there is an extra large model here in the way between the two. If it was another small model like this, then Mercy would only get a +1. So the +1 bonus is for soft cover, which includes small models, trees, hedges, if she was behind a hedge, or this fence. The +2 is for hard cover, which would be behind medium and above size models and buildings, larger walls, etc. Another action could be to recover, so spending 1 action point if Mercy wanted to recover, and you have to be unengaged in order to recover, and you can remove 1 condition from either herself or a friendly model within 2 inches. So in this case, let's say Cernos had the bleed. She could spend 1 AP during her turn to do a recover action to remove the bleed token from Cernos. Another option is to pass. If she has nothing else to do, then she can spend an AP to pass because you have to spend all of your AP. Also another AP to reload a weapon that has limited ammunition, and the item will say whether or not it requires reloading. Also, some attacks are AoE. So let's say here that the Dunsmith Witch wanted to do an AoE attack here, and in this circumstance she is targeting Mercy. So we would just line up center to center. As long as Mercy was anywhere along this line of the template, we would just overlay it using the edge, and in this case, even the ally here, Molly, is going to be hit by the blast. It's going to hit Cernos as well as just barely hits Mercy good. It hits the edge of her base, so she's going to be included. So Dunsmith Witch is going to roll just once, add Arcane or whatever attack this type is, and then each one, including the ally, will have to roll defense against that type of attack separately. And so each one is resolved separately. So these are pretty powerful if you can get the enemy lined up like that. So for example, here we see that Nadragil has the familiar trait on his card. And that basically means that as long as an ally has line of sight, so let's say Dorothy has line of sight to Nadragil, then she can use him as the point of attack for her arcane attack. So sometimes that's beneficial if she doesn't have range or doesn't have line of sight to one of the enemies. She can use one of the familiars in order to do that. So let's talk about sanity. and spending Mythos. So again, like I mentioned before, you can spend Mythos in order to activate the Mythos effect whenever you are attacking. But anytime that a character spends Mythos, they have to immediately make a sanity check. And that's where this stat comes into play. So you're rolling 2 dice, add your sanity, you have to hit 13 in order to succeed. If you fail, the character gains 1 madness per point of Mythos spent. So if Nadrigil had spent 2 points of Mythos and fails his sanity test, then he would take 2 points of madness. So if this causes a character to reach its madness threshold, so for Nadrigil that is 3, then you do flip the card over after you resolve all the actions that he did here. And then once you flip over, you have to immediately roll on the madness table. You don't get a save roll or anything like that. You just automatically roll a 2d6. And you can look at that table on page 11, but basically here on the cheat sheet, the lower you roll, the worse it is. So you want to roll high. The only good thing is if you roll a 10 to 11, nothing happens. And if you roll a critical success, basically 2 6s, you actually gain a bonus, depending on whether you're a mortal or a myth creature. Here are the conditions modifier. And then the final phase is the end phase, where you generate victory points, and each scenario will tell you how victory points are gained. And then if someone isn't declared a winner, then you start all over again. So that was a quick rundown of the rules for Mythos. Hopefully this is helpful for you to decide whether or not this is a game that you want to get into. Like I mentioned before, I like the simpler rule set. All of the rules fit on this 2-page summary sheet, so it's not overly complicated. Please like and subscribe if this video was helpful for you. Again, check out my Patreon page to see what the GGGG is for this month. I do not have a painting tutorial, unfortunately, of the miniatures, but you can check out a lot of my other painting tutorials as I use the same method. Happy hobbying, happy gaming. We'll see you next time.